Senator Watson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I want to start by probably saying something that is not entirely connected to these estimates. But I want to say that I abhor any type of violence and abuse. And I want to recognize the resolve and tenacity and strength of our leader of government business. And let the country know that the continued violence that's taken over Barbados must stop and must be stamped out. And with that, Madam President, I want to offer my best wishes to Senator McLean. Madam President, this is the 93rd meeting of this Senate, I believe. And I think that over that course, I may have missed just one meeting here. Except for the first occasion when I came to present on the estimates. And that was a very, not traumatic, but it was a bit overwhelming because it was only 2 weeks after we came in here that we were faced with this big book and a whole set of figures that when I begin to look at them, I begin to, wonder what am I doing? But Madam President, there's a saying that when you're just beginning to learn to be a toddler, you become a preteen. And just when you're about learning to be a good preteen, you become a teenager. And when you are now learning and really mastering the timing of a teenager, you become a young adult. The point I'm making, Madam President, it seems as though you're never really ready for the place that you're at sometimes in life. In spite of that, Madam President, I came to realize that this document each year told us basically the same thing. It told us what the revenue was of the government, that is, what the expenditure would be, and of course every year there was a deficit. And then the estimates sought to show where that revenue is going to come from and where the expenditure is going to be spent. And then how the deficit is going to be financed. And just when, Madam President, I am beginning to understand that concept, this may be the last time that I'm presenting on these estimates. Takes time, it takes time. Over the years, with this big book, different colors, this year is green, one of the things that was missing was the goals of the government that would have led to how the estimates were prepared. And this year, I think we are fortunate because we have another document, Madam President, which we got, I think, just over a week ago, and which presents a lot of fine print and a lot of tables and a lot of information for a poor little head like mine. The Barbados Sustainable Recovery Plan 2018. So this gives us some sort of idea of what the government goals are and the way the estimates of how those goals are going to be achieved. So, Madam President, I think we are fortunate this year to have something that's slightly different in that we have some sort of plan regarding the estimates. In addition to that, Madam President, we have another, well, we had a set of goals before which said socially balanced, I don't remember all the things, economically viable, characterized by good governance. But during the 50th anniversary, we got another set. And that, I think, was a very well thought out few questions, 3 questions to be exact. And the questions that the Prime Minister put to the country on the 50th anniversary were, what are those features of Barbadian life that we have lost that we need to reclaim? What are those features of Barbadian life that we have not lost and need to retain? And then the third question is, what were those features of Barbadian life that we have not lost, but we have to try to discard as quickly as possible? And Madam President, we have quite a few of them. So, Madam President, it is against the background of having some sort of plan and some very instructive questions that I will attempt to respond to this very large green book, even if not quantitative, but more qualitative. When I first came here, I was lucky because the first item on the agenda was something that I was fairly familiar with. It was a time when the government had decided to discontinue the Social Investment Fund. And that motivated me to speak at that time, Madam President. And it became clear to me even then that there were some things that we need to change, according to the questions being asked by the Prime Minister. Madam President, I want to suggest that the first change should take place in this Senate. And I'm saying that because of lots of discussion that I've heard, comments I've heard people make. And thinking of it myself, I think it is a fairly rational thing. Madam President, the Senate has 21 senators, 12 of which represent the government, 2 the opposition, and 7 representing independent thinking senators. I stress independent thinking because there is too much nonsense on the outside which tend to suggest that the independent senators are the extensions of government senators. And I want to make it clear that of these other 6 senators here, I see total independent thinking and nothing to do with being influenced by what government does or what government wants, but rather what they consider to be in the best interest of the Barbadian public. Madam President, it is obvious that the way the allocation of the Senate is done, that everything that the government brings to the Senate will pass. And I think that the general public questions that. And Madam President, I remembered when I first came here, at least not when I first came here, when I was first given the appointment here, I went back to my club a few nights after and I told them about my appointment. and that I will represent the interests of small business and manufacturers. And one of my wise Kawanian colleagues said to me, "Oh no, you are not to represent any special group. You are to represent the other 280,000 people out here." And Madam President, I took that, well, as seriously as I could, because I don't think that I am entirely capable of doing that, but I know that whenever I stood on my feet here, that was the effort I made. So, Madam President, I want to say that there are several people outside who would say that it is right for the government to have the majority senators in this chamber because the government was elected to manage the country, and therefore they must be given the majority vote so that they may be able to carry out their business. On the other hand, there are some who say that the balance in the Senate should be held by the independent senators. And the reasons given, Madam President, in the lower house, you have purely elected members who represent political interests. Up here, we have a little more than representation of political interests. And therefore, while we must trust people in authority and people in high office, and I agree with that, Madam President, I believe that we must trust our Commissioner of Police, we must trust our Chief Immigration Officer, we must trust the principals in our schools. People in authority must be trusted. And I am pretty sure that it is unlikely that any government would bring any legislation to this chamber which they believe is to the detriment of Barbados. In fact, they will bring it only because they believe it is to the benefit of Barbados. But Madam President, we know that politicians are politicians, and that political parties in government has the objective of retaining government, and the politicians in opposition have the objective of winning the government. And therefore, their views, their policies, their thoughts may be skewed because of that. And it is the balance of the independent senators, Madam President, that would help in that connection, because where there may be a slight off balance, I think the input of independent senators will put that back into balance in the interest of a better Barbados. Madam President, I am suggesting, therefore, that if the makeup of the Senate should change to give that balance that I just spoke about. So I am suggesting, Madam President, that the 7 independent senators should remain 7, but that the government should have 10 and the opposition 4, which more often than not will still ensure that the government wins any legislation, any vote that is taken here. But on the odd occasion where the balance is required, I think that gives the opportunity to the Senate to make the best decisions in the interest of Barbados. So, Madam President, that is my suggestion for one of those things that we have that we may need to change. I'm not suggesting at all that it removes any power from the government, but what it does is that it gives the representation of all people a better chance of getting the best. And I believe that that is something that we all strive for because we want to represent the people. And it will also, I believe, give more confidence to the working of this Senate. Madam President, when I came here that first day, it struck me, and I believe I mentioned it in one of my early speeches. It struck me that the opposition has the party machinery behind them, and the preparation, research, and everything for bills and any resolutions and amendments that come to the Senate. The government has likewise the machinery of their party, the parliamentary group, and it also, in addition to that, has the backing or the access to much of the information in the public service. The independent senators, Madam President, have the responsibility of representing the interests, the varied interests of the 280,000 people out there. And it needs some technical and clerical support to help the government to make the right decisions. I believe, Madam President, when I spoke at that time, I suggested that there should be an office of independent senators. And it should be fully equipped with staff who can do any research that is needed and do any clerical work that is needed. And I believe that the independent senators would make a greater contribution because of that, instead of having to rely purely on the time available to us and the information available to us to make contributions in this Senate. Madam President, since I've been here, there are things that I know that we want to keep as well. There are things that we needed to change, but the one thing that I am impressed with this chamber with, and which we must keep, is the way that we conduct ourselves. We in this Senate make sure that we treat each other with respect, good manners, decency, and decorum, even when the debates get robust, when Senator Abrams go up against Senator Ince, or Senator Hunt has to answer Senator Walcott. The aspects of good manners, decency, and decorum still exist, and that is something, Madam President, that I think we need to keep in this Senate. Going on, Madam President, I had to ask myself a critical question about Barbados. And that question, which has to be answered by Barbados, is what is it that Barbados needs at this time and the answer, Madam President, I've come up with myself and I hope that it is a question that all other people would answer. Barbados needs, right now, a well-designed strategy and program to produce the goods and services that Barbados needs at affordable prices. I think that is what all governments have a responsibility to do. We have to come up with programs and policies that ensure that the goods and services of Barbados are available to our citizens at affordable prices. And Madam President, I believe that there's some attempt to handle that in this document called the Barbados Sustainable Recovery Plan. But I'm sure that there are some things in there that are not in there that would be useful to investigate as well. And Madam President, the easiest way of determining what those things are is by understanding and going back to the basics of an economy. And I'm not an economist, but I understand that where a country grows what it eats and eats what it grows, where a country wears and uses what they manufacture and manufacture what they want, what they wear and use, is a country that is really fairly independent. Additionally, Madam President, Barbados provides, at least the Barbados government provides goods and services that the people of Barbados require. And this is done through a number of ministries and agencies. And when I look at the table 7 in the estimates, they number about 24. About 24 ministries and agencies listed there. And those agencies and ministries provide goods and services so that Barbados could function. However, Madam President, I believe that with some rationalizing and consolidating, these ministries and agencies can be reduced to, well, I'll give you the number in a minute. They could be reduced to about 14. If this is done, and I did this without all the knowledge of all the detailed workings of all the ministries, but simply by understanding where there were some overlaps in ministries and where, in fact, there were some complementary aspects of the ministries that could be put together. So, Madam President, my feeling is that if and when these 14 ministries are formed, they will have the capacity to facilitate and achieve the same 6 goals that are in this book. Madam President, those goals, and I believe that when the person who's replying or who's wrapping up this debate would tell us, but there seems to be a little error in the goal number 1, where at one time it is saying 2020 and another time it's saying 2021. So I believe that 2021 might be a better time, because building up foreign reserves is not an easy thing to do. And I believe that the longer time might be better. So with those 6 goals, I believe that those combination of ministries can achieve them. And I know that I don't have enough time to go into all the detail of how it can be done. But certainly, I believe that there's enough brain power within the cabinet, within the public sector, and of course the group that produced this document, to be able to look and see where further consolidation of the ministries and agencies can be done, and I believe that's one of the things that will be done. I want to make a few suggestions as far as that is concerned, because I think that, well, discussion is discussion. What I say might be completely discarded. Some of it may be taken, or all of it may be taken. But the fact of the matter is that I would like to offer what I consider to be some of the combinations regarding those 24 agencies and ministries. And Madam President, it starts at the top with the Governor General, which I have no problem with, Parliament, which I have no problem with. I believe that the next three could be combined as one. That is the Prime Minister's Office, Cabinet Office, and Ministry of the Civil Service can be one.
Madam President, I raise on a point of order. I believe that the Honourable Senator may be misleading the Senate and perhaps himself. I'm not sure if I understood correctly, but he's referring to elements of a ministry which a single ministry, the Cabinet Office, the Service Commission, the Civil Service, all of those come under the Ministry of the Prime Minister, on the Ministry of the Prime Minister. So that's a single ministry in essence. So I'm not sure if I understood correctly, but if what I understood what to be correct, then there's some misunderstanding and thus misleading.
Thank you for the guidance. I was sort of aware that that is the case, but what I'm suggesting is that within the estimates, they are listed as 3 different ministries and agencies, even though they are all within the same. So the administration of the grouping is something that I was more considering. But I stand corrected, and I believe that for the purpose of this listing, that's the way I saw it. And I believe that that same issue may arise again as I go along, because I'm thinking that instead of having 24 different agencies and ministries, that we would have 14. But Madam President, I will, without going into any detail about that, just continue to mention that there is room for the consolidation of some of these ministries. And I'll give an example of what I'm talking about, Madam President. If we look at the Ministry of Tourism, if you look at the Ministry of Tourism, Madam President, you will see that tourism includes international transport. If you look at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, my belief is that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs could fit nicely into the Ministry of Tourism, because they're dealing in some way with the same things, and that the Ministry of Foreign Trade should go to
Madam President. Madam President, on a point of elucidation, not on a point of order, a point of elucidation.
Yes, that's fine.
Madam President, I am listening to Senator Watson, and I didn't want to disturb his presentation, but you cannot make a determination on the estimates with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Tourism based on an oil field theory. You either have to do quantitative or qualitative analysis and see what impact a merger would have on government's expenditure as well as its revenue through the tourism receipts. And it is important to do these things. I'm not saying that his oil field theory that's his theory, but in reality, for those who do not understand what the estimates are, you have to do a qualitative or quantitative analysis, and a qualitative analysis would go on what we call the theory side. The quantitative analysis will go on the numbers side. And that's all I want to say, Madam President.
Madam President, as I thanked Senator Ince yesterday for his lecture, I do that once again today. I thank you for the information, and in fact, Madam President, I think when I started, I did mention that my comments would be more qualitative than quantitative. And the reason for that, Madam President, is probably because the independent senators lack the office that will do the research for us. I'm just saying what I'm saying. I believe that if I were able to give these theories to a research department, maybe my comments would have been more in line with what Senator Ince is saying. So my point maybe of having the facilities for independent senators are made stronger by the comments of Senator Ince just now. Madam President, so as not to confuse this issue further, I just want to suggest that when you look at the number of ministries and agencies with government, that there is need and there is a lot of room for further rationalizing and consolidating, which would bring our agencies to a smaller amount and probably better managed. One of the important things in Barbados, Madam President, as you know, is the idea of productivity. Our productivity has been giving us lots of trouble over the years. We have not been able to come to grips with how we can increase our productivity in Barbados. And it has to start at some level, and I believe that's a good place to start. I do not think that the levels of productivity that we've been getting are acceptable, and I believe that there's some effort that has to be made about getting that done. I some time ago mentioned here that what we need is productivity officers within the various agencies in government. And therefore, Madam President, again, I'm suggesting that. But let me move on, Madam President, to the areas that are of interest to me. Madam President, this document that sets out the 6 goals, I am surprised, if not taken back, that nowhere in the 6 goals has it explicitly said anything about small business. And every country in the world which has development at the fore ensures that the small business sector is well represented, well taken care of, and Barbados should be no different. I believe that earlier on it was said that ways will be found to help small business, and I've said in here several times, Madam President, that one of the drawbacks in small business is market share. And not only market share, but we have to find innovative ways of improving the lot of small businesses. If we're talking about the number one goal, which is boost foreign exchange earnings through creating more attractive conditions for foreign and portfolio investment, business facilitation, and export growth potential. Madam President, I heard Senator Will mention the idea of foreign exchange saving, and I believe that that is the first step towards foreign exchange earning. Manufacturers all over the world depend on their local market in order to be stabilized and be functioning well enough to be able to get into the export market. And therefore, there must be some way of creating the conditions in Barbados for manufacturers to get a larger share of the local market. And the market is there. The products are there, even though some of them may not be being produced now. Our furniture, Madam President, there are furniture companies in Barbados that if you go into, you will not find any local furniture. There was a time when local furniture was in every store, every furniture store in Barbados, in Trinidad, in Jamaica, in Guyana, everywhere. Now you find Trinidadian furniture in Barbadian stores. And that is not only because of the short-sightedness of the Barbadian manufacturers. And I, some time ago, wanted to know why that would have happened when Barbados' exports in the 80s, Barbados exports to the Caribbean from Puerto Rico down to Guyana and up to Jamaica, Barbadians manufacturers were exporting. And all of a sudden, they're no longer exporting. I asked at that time for the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute to do a study, see what is wrong so that we could correct it. I believe that that's one of the questions that was asked. What are the features in life that we have lost that we need to reclaim? We need to reclaim more manufacturing sector. Madam President, it is not difficult to start, and to start by simple things. Start with the schools, all the furniture in the schools, all the uniforms in the schools. You could go on to school meals. Most of the produce for the school meals should be produced by small producers in Barbados. I remembered when I was very much involved with the Small Business Association, when I was more closely involved with the Small Business Association. We started a program of organizing different groups of producers to facilitate some of the work that was available. We had our landscapers who had contracts to landscape various BIDC parks, who were able to get contracts for some of the high commissions to landscape. We were able to put together some of our air-conditioned people. We air-conditioned the port building and a few other places. And more importantly, Madam President, we had a group of people who supplied the school meal service. That has stopped for whatever reason. And that is one way of creating market share for the small producers in Barbados. Madam President, the question of foreign exchange saving or earning. Hotels in Barbados, and this is a real sore point, hotels in Barbados get tremendous incentives from the Barbadian public. And I believe, Madam President, and I've said this several times, I believe, Madam President, it is time that there is a way found that the manufacturers and producers in Barbados benefit more from the idea, from the fact that there are hotels in Barbados that use all those products and goods and services as well, but are not using them, at least not using as much as they should from Barbados. Well, there's an experience that I know of, Madam President, where a food and beverage manager ordered something, guy produced it, and then he was told not to worry because the general manager ordered it from overseas. Now, that sort of thing dampens the spirit of local manufacturers, and you wonder why Barbados is not as productive as it should be. As a matter of fact, I believe somewhere in this same study that was done, that one of the problems with Barbadians is that they're not as industrious as they used to be. And that, Madam President, is something that should not happen, because Barbados, and I believe I heard Senator Ince talk about this very much, Barbados has been built on the resilience and the thriftiness and the creativity and the innovation of Barbadians. And we are losing it. We used to produce many things in Barbados, and we're not doing it now because people can just go overseas or look in a catalog or go online and order things that can be produced in Barbados. And Madam President, I want to see, as I said it here several times, tourism is extremely important to the development of Barbados. And we must do everything to make sure that tourism expands and expands, because it gives us the foreign exchange that we need. So, Madam President, if that is the case, I would like to see that there is some way that we benefit, the other sectors in Barbados benefit from the expansion of the tourist industry, because it is important to us. And it is the industry that will help the other sectors develop, especially agriculture and manufacturing. And even though I heard and see, not only heard, but I saw it myself, the MOU between the Manufacturers Association, the Barbados Agricultural Society, and the Barbados Hotel Association, about how they can collaborate and cooperate so that the manufacturers and the producers could better benefit from the hotel sector. Madam President, I believe that, unless I am told differently, unless I don't know, but that MOU is, as far as I can see, paper only. I'm not sure that there has been any measurement, there has been any checking, there's any follow-up to see what has been done. I've given an example in here already about myself personally, where a hotel needed a particular product. We didn't produce the product, but this was an overseas designer who saw what we did and helped us to develop the product that she wanted. And that is what development is all about. You don't have to be saying that the thing is not made in Barbados. The capabilities are in Barbados. I remembered people talking about the sorts of items the sort of produce that hotels want. You know, the tomato must be a certain size, a certain color, the time must be so, all sorts of specifications. And the fact is that there are young people in Barbados now who are getting into all sorts of little specialty agriculture that can get into the hotels and give the chefs what they want. But there has to be some cooperation and collaboration between the chef and the persons producing. And Madam President, that brings me to the idea of agriculture. This is, again, something that I have spoken about in here. It is wrong. As a matter of fact, I would almost say that it is a sin to be given God's land that he created for us, and we just leave it idle. I think that is terrible. Some people may call it an abomination. But I myself, Madam President, believe that a government must act in the best interests of its people. And a government must do what is in the best interest of the people. I believe, Madam President, that land should not be left idle in Barbados. We have, and I saw some of it on TV while I was having dinner here last night. There's a program, I call it HDR or something like that, where a lot of young people are being exposed to agriculture. There's nothing wrong with land, 2-acre lots and 1-acre lots and 3-acre lots being cut up legally, and making sure that whoever owns the land is properly compensated or the arrangements are made. But that land should be producing food for Barbados. I've heard Senator Adams talk about when there was war and the land produced the food for Barbados because the ships couldn't get here. And we need to make sure that we are producing what we eat, and we have to be eating what we produce. And that must be one of the policies of a government, so that we are not as dependent as we are in living in this country. Madam President, I just want to read, because I don't believe that a lot of people might have seen this, but I want to look at some of the things that the answering of these questions posed by the Prime Minister, some of the answers that were given. And I'm going to just read out a few of these things which the study said that Barbados should reclaim. Barbados should reclaim being religious. It should reclaim obeying the law. It should reclaim being respectful to other people. It should reclaim being respectful to those in authority. It should reclaim showing integrity. It should reclaim being responsible for their actions, and it should reclaim being industrious. Now, there are only 6 of about 15 that are here. And Madam President, these are the sorts of things that we need to start to not only look at, but make plans for dealing with. And I know that Senator Adams spent a lot of time on the school system, and I know that Senator Husbands is doing his best to make the school system what it should be. Madam President, you cannot plant an ackee tree and expect to reap guavas. If you plant an ackee tree and you treat it like an ackee tree, you will get good ackees. As a matter of fact, if I may say a personal example, if you plant a soursop tree that came out of St. Philip, and you plant that soursop tree in Christchurch, and you treat it like a soursop tree, it will still be a soursop tree. And Madam President, that is what we have to do with our people. We can't expect to treat our people differently than they should be treated, and then expect them to be what we expect them to be. So, Madam President, let me just congratulate the government for their attention to the creation of nursery schools in Barbados. I believe from my first or second contribution in this Senate, I pointed out the importance of children between 0 and 5. And I did that because, Madam President, I learned it from my association with a great organization called the Kiwanis Club. And they spent years, the Kiwanis Club is over 100 years old, and from beginning, their motto was serving the children. And that's what we do. And the reason for that is because if you serve the children well, you would have no trouble with the adults. And that's what we're failing with now, Madam President. Now, I said 0 to 5, and people wonder how you could deal with a child at 0. The child at 0 is the pregnant mother. And the pregnant mother has to be taught how to care for a child. I just had, I'm not sure, my son doesn't like me talking about him, but he just had the experience of his first son. But during the pregnancy, they were actually talking to the child. Actually playing music for the child while it was still in the mother's belly. And it is amazing that, the realization of that boy and seeing how he conducts himself as a baby is different from how my children conducted themselves. Because I didn't do that. I didn't know about that. But they knew about it. And I'm saying that a lot of children, a lot of parents today who we believe can raise children and look after children may not be so. Because I figured at my age when I had my children, I knew how to look after children. But there's a lot to parenting. And I think that there has to be a way of dealing with pregnant mothers. And Madam President, I don't just suggest a way. It may not meet the approval of many people. But I believe, Madam President, that your access to care at the polyclinics must be conditional that you attend parenting sessions at the polyclinic when you go there. I believe, Madam President, that even where parents attend private doctors, that once you are benefiting from national insurance, that should be a condition of your getting the maternity benefit. Now, that may sound bizarre, but people make mention of Singapore, and here several times, Madam President, Singapore did not become Singapore because of any Nandi-Pandi policies. I was fortunate to go to Singapore just for a day or two because I was in that part of the world, fortunately. And you can't, you spit on the street, Madam President, you have a problem. So there is a benefit in discipline, and Senator Husbands talked about it yesterday. We neglect discipline and then expect good results. You cannot expect good results from indiscipline. And I agree 100%. The first step in discipline is punctuality. I'm not saying that this Senate is indisciplined because we seldom start on time, but I believe that in normal life, indiscipline is something that should be stamped out. Madam President, I believe I have just a few more minutes, and I want to revert back to something that I started. Madam President, there's been a lot of development in Barbados. We had all types of development, especially social development. And I've mentioned that in here already, so I'm not going to go over it. But what I'm going to repeat, and unfortunately not much more time to repeat it, but I'm going to repeat it. The next step in Barbados's development must be economic enfranchisement. And even though there have been attempts at that from time to time, I do not see any pointed policy that is really creating any economic enfranchisement for the majority of Barbadians. And that must be a policy and a program that must be developed in order to move our people forward. Madam President, I believe that the best vehicle for achieving that is through the development of small business. When we talk about moving our, trying to see if I could find it here, our growth to 3%, I think it is. Well, let me say this, Madam President. You put $5,000 in the small business sector, and you will see so much activity you won't believe it. You put $5,000 in a large business, it's like searching for a drop of water in the sea. And I believe, Madam President, and I said it then and I'll say it again, this idea that caused the government to close the Social Investment Fund should be something that be looked at again. Now, I'm told that rural development fills some of that need, but of course, it seemed to me that social rural development is short of funds right now. So I'm not sure whether those people who want to buy a little sewing machine or who wants to buy a lawnmower to upgrade his landscaping, or the guy who wants to buy a mixer to start making his bread, those $2,000 and $3,000 and $4,000 loans, I'm not sure that you can get them easily. If you go to Fund Access and sit in front of a loans officer asking for $2,000, you're wasting his time. And he would feel so too. So he not going to pay you the same attention as the guy who comes in and asks for $50,000 or $100,000. And that kind of financing we are lacking now. I remembered in the early days when I was young and active, we were fortunate to have connected with an organization called the National Development Foundation, with the Pan American Development Foundation. And I had the good fortune of being its first chairman. And that organization was doing very well. I don't want to get into the details of where it went out, but the fact is, the intent of what that organization was doing was right. It was small loans to people to develop. And that is the sort of thing that Barbados needs to carry on and push our small business sector. Madam President, I want to wrap up by giving another area of concern as far as governance is concerned. Madam President, I, on Saturday, sat in this room with a committee called the Public Accounts Committee. And we sat in this room from 11 o'clock a.m. up to after 10:30 p.m. on Saturday night in order to finish a report in time. And Madam President, my experience with that committee, and I must say is probably one of the better experiences that I've had in my life. That meeting was the 43rd meeting of that committee. 43rd meeting of that committee, of which I attended 42 of them. Like in this Senate, this is the 93rd meeting, and I attended 92 of the meetings here. On the outside, people talk about the nonsense of having a public accounts committee because nothing is done. People talk about the amount of things being written in the Auditor General's report.
The honourable member has 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. About the Auditor General's report, and nothing is done. Madam President, one of the best ways of ensuring good governance in Barbados is to have a functioning and structured public accounts committee. And I believe, Madam President, it doesn't matter which government, which parties in the government, that committee should be a committee that represents, as I said before, the interests of Barbados. And I think that it would do well for the report of that Public Accounts Committee, even though it could not be all-inclusive, but there is sufficient recommendations there that we should pay attention to, because it does not matter if it is the UPP, Solutions Barbados, the Barbados Labour Party, the Democratic Labour Party, who is government. The fact is that that committee should be one to make sure that the public's interest is looked after. And Madam President, again, in that committee, we have the same problem that we have here, where anytime the government wants to stop or to pass anything, they have complete power to do it because of their majority on the committee. I believe, Madam President, that sufficient independent senators should sit on that committee to give the committee that balance again, so that if there is a divide, then it is the independent senators who will make the judgment as to which side to go. And I say that, Madam President, in all seriousness, because there's always going to be political considerations, and we can't get around that. That is a fact of nature. There's no way that a BLP representative is going to make a decision that is to the detriment of his party. There's no way that a DLP representative is going to make a decision that is to the detriment of their party. Thank you, Madam President. So, Madam President, I want to just wrap up by saying that I enjoyed my sojourn here. And I enjoyed all your rulings. I enjoyed being here. Madam President, I think that this is an experience that has served me well. It is an experience that, it is a pity, if I may say so, Madam President, that we do not find a way to get in more Barbadians to come in here and more Barbadians to listen to what goes on in the Senate, because I believe that it is in this Senate that the best discussions take place. And it is a pity that more Barbadians do not pay attention to what happens in this Senate. And with those few words, Madam President, I want to thank you, and I am going to say that I do support the estimates, and I expect that very soon we will see which direction Barbados is going. Thank you.